hope that you will keep that in mind. It's all going to be okay, especially in light of what I'm going to share with you this morning. You may need to know that, all right? This is April 7th, 2024. My first Sunday with you was April 7th, 1985. Exactly 39 years ago today. So I'm beginning, actually I'd been here the week before and had been in prayer meeting, but I have no doubt begun my 40th year. And because of that, I'm going to ask for a little extra grace this morning, okay? I have no idea what I'm getting into. I didn't know back then with you, and I still don't know about that. But what I'm talking about is not so much you, but it's the subject that we're going to be getting into. Now, this week I've spent many hours, both day and night, going through some of the things that I'm going to share with you this morning. And I believe they're very important. I shared with you about a year ago that in my heart of hearts, I believe God is doing something in this day and age. I don't know what it is, but I believe He's up to something. And I think if you have an open mind and open heart this morning, that you'll come to the same conclusion. So give me a little grace. I always handwrite out my messages, and they're about 8 to 10 or 11 pages, and this one's in that time frame, but I just have a sneaking suspicion I may go a minute over. I apologize in advance if I do, but I dare not pull back, okay, because of what we're talking about this morning. And if you have your Bible, you can go ahead and turn to Numbers chapter 19. Now, we've taken a 2-week break from our studies in the Psalms, and one of the things that we found out was that looking at both Passover and then the resurrection, Easter Sunday, we realized that God has appointed times. Genesis 1:14 has become so important to me that God put the sun, moon, and stars in the skies for signs and for appointed times. We sometimes call it seasons, but appointed times is a better word. God communicates through the heavens. And it's just interesting, some of the things that are going on. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but if you've been watching the news, especially on the internet, about some of the things going on in the religious world, one of the things that you cannot escape is this matter of a red heifer. Because you see, last September, the nation of Israel imported 5 red heifers from Texas. All you Texans can be glad of that. They came from Texas. And it has just become a blaze on the internet with all the stories about the red heifer. Many of us may not have an idea what it's talking about, but before the day is over, you will. I'm going to be speaking primarily about the ashes of the red heifer and why this subject is so important. Now, that's not the only thing that's going on in internet news these days, and you will see more as we go through this message. But I want to address some of the things that are happening in our day right now. So if you have your Bible open, Numbers chapter 19, look with me, if you will, beginning in verse 1. Now, this is the only passage that deals with the red heifer. You'll find it in Hebrews chapter 10 in the New Testament, but as far as the Old Testament, this is the passage that gives us insight into what the red heifer is all about. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "This is the statute of the law which the Lord has commanded, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel that they may bring you an unblemished red heifer in which is no defect, and on which a yoke has never been placed. You shall give it to Eleazar the priest, and it shall be brought outside the camp and be slaughtered in his presence." Now notice, the priest doesn't do it, but it is done in his presence. Next, Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle some of its blood toward the front of the tent of meeting 7 times. Now, let me just tell you, at this point in Jewish history, they did not have the temple. They had the tabernacle, that tent of meeting, if you will. They had been on the move, and so they did not have, they hadn't been in the Holy Land very long, and they did not have the temple. So this, according to verse 4, would happen at the tent of meeting, which was the tabernacle. Then the heifer shall be burned in his sight. Its hide and its flesh and its blood with its refuse shall be burned. The priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet material and cast it into the midst of the burning heifer. The priest shall then wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward come into the camp, but the priest shall be unclean until evening. The one who burns it shall also wash his clothes in water and bathe his body in water, and shall be unclean until evening. Now, a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and deposit them outside the camp in a clean place. And the congregation of the sons of Israel shall keep it as water to remove impurity. It is purification from sin. The one who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And it shall be a perpetual statute to the sons of Israel and to the alien who sojourns among them. An interesting sacrifice that they were making, the ashes of the red heifer. Now, I mentioned that last September, 5 heifers were imported to Israel. Here are 3 of them in the first picture we want to show you. They're beautiful animals. They actually had 5, and you can see the other 2 in the background there. But at least one of them has been disqualified because these heifers are to be absolutely perfect, no blemish. If they find one white hair on that heifer, she is disqualified. And at least these 3, I've read different things, and by the way, I have listened hours and hours, I have read hours and hours, I have looked up every verse on different subjects in the Bible on different things that I'm going to be talking about this morning. And so Phyllis and I were talking about, I can't even tell you where I got half the stuff I'm getting, but it's not original to me. And what I want to do this morning is in light of this picture, milk many cows and churn our own butter, okay? That's what we're going to do. So I'm gathering information from all over the internet, and I'll let you, and the news media. Many of these things that I'm talking about, I have seen with my own eyes in the news, even within the last 24 hours. If you're watching, if you're listening, you're going to see and hear things about this day and age. It's fascinating. Now, the interesting thing about this idea of a red heifer has popped up several times before. In 1997, they thought they had a red heifer, but it didn't pan out. In 2002, they thought they had a red heifer, but it didn't pan out. This year, it has panned out. And I will tell you that they hope to have these animals sacrificed by Passover of this year. That is April 22nd. So we're talking just a couple more weeks. Will it happen? I don't know. And you may already be saying, Pastor, what are you trying to tell us? I don't know. I am just telling you, keep your eyes open. Things are happening. And I am convinced of that. Now, why is this so controversial? Well, and by the way, Hamas has said that one of the reasons they attacked on October 7th was because the Jews had brought red heifers into Israel. And you scratch your head if you don't know about these things, and you say, well, why would that matter? They attacked Israel because of 5 red heifers they brought in from Texas? Well, you see, they understand if these animals are sacrificed, it means that the Jews will be beginning to have animal sacrifices again. And they know that Israel would want the Temple Mount. Now, on the Temple Mount, you have a couple of buildings. One is a gold-covered dome that you see called the Dome of the Rock. By the way, an oil company from America gold-plated that thing. We did that many years ago, and back in the 60s, I believe, if memory serves correctly. But anyway, you've got the Dome of the Rock, and then you have the Al-Aqsa Mosque. To the Muslim world, that is the 3rd most holy site in the Muslim world. But it's also the location, the very location of the first and second temple. So it's also very holy to the Jews. And immediately you see the conflict. The Muslims are saying, we know you're going to want that land back and you're not going to get it. I watched the imam of the mosque, of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, saying if they try to take this land, 1.5 billion Muslims will come after Israel. So it is a big deal. It really is. And you can see the conflict. It's easy to understand that. Now, I want to approach this from 3 different areas, and I want you to consider with me, first of all, the unique timing about this event, the unique timing of this sacrifice. Why now? What's going on now? Why is this such an uproar? And what makes it so unique? Well, there are 5 or 6 things that I want to share with you about. Now, today is April 7th. Tomorrow will be April 8th. But to the Jew, tomorrow is Nisan 1. It is the first day of their new year. And the month of Nisan is a very important month. 14 days into the month of Nisan, you will have Passover. The 15th day, we noted last week that unleavened bread begins. The 16th day, the Feast of First Fruits begins. So it's a very sacred month to the Jews. Tomorrow is Nisan 1. Okay. Now, what makes this timing incredible is some of the things that are going on tomorrow. For example, you no doubt have heard something about a solar eclipse, the solar eclipse of 2024. Well, I promise you I could talk for an hour about that, and it is fascinating, some of the things you will find about it. But what makes it unique is that 7 years ago, we had what was called the Great American Solar Eclipse. The reason it was called that is because the only country it appeared in was America. It entered the nation at Salem, Oregon, and exited in South Carolina. And this year we're having another solar eclipse, and their paths cross, as you'll see on the slide, and it makes an X. And it's real interesting because when the first one came in 2017, it's the one on the left. You'll see the 2017 is the year. Scientists actually designate these things in order to categorize them into different categories, like Saros 145, and then Saros 139. But the one on the left coming down is the one that happened in 2017. It began in Salem, Oregon. Strangely enough, it went over 7 cities called Salem. The next slide will point that out. Here it is, and you'll see these 7 cities that are named Salem that in the path of this. This year it's a little different. It starts in actually Eagle Pass, Texas, which is, again, you could talk for 30 minutes about the significance of that. But it starts in Eagle Pass, Texas, and it makes a path over 7 cities called Nineveh. 7 cities called Nineveh. Now that's strange, isn't it? In fact, the next slide, you'll see it there. Now, it doesn't directly cover all of them, but it does, they'll fall within the shadow of it, at least within the 80% of it. Just like we're not going to have the complete solar eclipse here. We're going to be in like the 80% range or something. But it goes over these cities named Nineveh. Now, why is that significant? Well, you may probably not remember what happened in 763 BC. But God sent a man named Jonah to Nineveh. And he began to share 40 days, and God's going to bring judgment on you. A lot of background to it we don't have to go into. But something else happened in 763 BC, 763 BC. There was a solar eclipse, and I want you to notice where it went. This is actually a slide from NASA. NASA drew this up. You can, because of the accuracy of the stars, you can pinpoint. This actually was a solar eclipse over the city of Nineveh in June 15th, 763 BC. Now, 40 days, and Nineveh will be overthrown. Do you know what happened 40 days later? Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the Day of Judgment. And so it's very easy to believe. Whether he did it, I can't say 100% from sure, but it sure looks interesting that on June 15th, 763 BC, there was a solar eclipse. Jonah was there that year and was saying in 40 days, judgment is coming. And it happened to fall on Yom Kippur. Fascinating. Just coincidence, I'm sure. Now, this X marks the spot on these 2 solar eclipses crossing. Now, they're a little over 100 miles wide, the shadow of a complete solar eclipse. And where they cross, if you take Google Earth and just come in completely, you'll come to a place in a national forest, the next slide, and you know where it lands? On Salem Road. Again, just an amazing coincidence. Salem means peace. Jerusalem is the city of peace. And so it's just fascinating. Again, Pastor, what are you saying? I'm not sure, but I don't think it's just coincidence, okay? All right, so first of all, when you think about the unique timing, you think about the solar eclipse. Second, the Hadron Collider. 30 years ago this year, 1994, they began talking about in CERN, Switzerland, a Hadron Collider. Now, if you're not familiar with it, let me tell you a little bit about it. It's a tunnel underground in the shape of a circle. It's 17 miles in length, 17 miles in a circle, and it's 300 feet underground. The object of it is to take two atoms and have them spinning in opposite directions at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. They think they can do this. And what they want to do is have those two atoms collide. And when they do, they're convinced that it will break down and show what holds atoms together. They call that the God particle. Interestingly enough, they're looking for the God particle. What is it that holds the atoms together? By the way, you wouldn't have to spend billions of dollars. I can tell you why. Colossians 1:17 says, and Jesus was before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the one who holds it together. But they're looking, isn't it interesting? They're looking for the God particle. They don't know exactly what's going to happen. They don't know. But interestingly enough, the city of CERN, Switzerland, in Roman days was called Apollicum, Apollicum, Apollicum. Now, they had a temple there, and the city was named after the god Apollyon, the destroyer. Interesting. Now, let me read to you from Revelation chapter 9. And you can make a note of this. It's Revelation chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. And then I'll share verse 11 as well. But listen if you would. Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star given from heaven, which had fallen to the earth, and the key to the bottomless pit was given to him. He opened the bottomless pit, and smoke went up out of the pit, and the smoke of a great furnace, like the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke came locusts upon the earth, and power was given them as the scorpions of the earth have power. He goes on to describe the power of those locusts. It's a demonic horde. But when you get to verse 11, it says, they have as king over them the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in the Greek he has the name Apollyon. So CERN, Switzerland was named after Apollyon. Again, all these are just amazing coincidences, I know. But that's where the city is built. They don't know what's going to happen when they smash these atoms together. That's one of the reasons it's built 300 feet underground in case there's a nuclear explosion. We're talking about nuclear things here, folks. And they don't know exactly what's going to happen. But one of the things that they realize could happen, it could open up a link to the space-time continuum. In other words, time travel may be possible. Albert Einstein believed it was theoretically possible. And they think they've got a shot at this. You say, oh, Pastor, surely you're kidding. Listen, if you would, to what Sergio Bertolucci, the director of research in CERN, said. Something may come through dimensional doors at the Hadron Collider, and out of this door might come something, or we might send something through it. Folks are talking about time travel. They don't know what's going to happen. They have no clue. But another interesting fact about it is the scientific community of India sent a statue. And this is a statue that's found outside the building there in CERN, Switzerland. Here's the first picture of her. It's Shiva, the goddess of destruction and rebirth. Now, again, the scientific community from India sent this. You can see her from the backside, same thing. It's a ring of fire. Those are emblems of fire. And it's a copper chain on the inside. And you know, this is the picture they have out front, but if you'll notice there's a plaque there in a little round circle. Let me show you what the plaque says. Thousands of years ago, Indian artists made the image of Lord Shiva absorbed in the dance from the copper chain. Today, in our time, all physical scientists are again using advanced technologies to create the format of cosmic dance. At present, scientists' theory of cosmic dance actually stands on the foundation of ancient myths, religion, art, and physics. Modern physics tells us that the process of creation and cataclysm is not just linked to the beginning and end of life in the universe, but to the particles of the whole creation. Now, folks, these guys are doing a particle dance on the microscopic level, and Shiva is the perfect emblem of that. The goddess of destruction and rebuilding. And when do these experiments begin? When are they going to try to smash these atoms together? Tomorrow. 30 years in the building. Tomorrow is the day. Strange coincidence number 3. The NASA rocket launch of tomorrow. I saw this in the news just yesterday. NASA will send 3 rockets up into the eclipse because they want to understand atmospheric conditions and what happens when the eclipse comes over. Very understandable. We want to know what happens. But I want you to notice the emblem and the announcement from NASA about this. NASA, APEP mission, April 8th. By the way, April 8th is tomorrow if you haven't picked up on that yet, okay? Now, APEP mission, what is that all about? Well, APEP is the Egyptian god of destruction. He is constantly in battle with Ra, the sun god. Here's a picture of one of the depictions of that. They're constantly in battle. But again, notice the next slide, if you will. This is an announcement about it. The Space Agency's project, Atmospheric Perturbations, man, that's hard to get out, around the eclipse path, that's the APEP, will investigate how the drop in sunlight and temperature affect Earth's upper atmosphere. APEP is the name of the serpent deity from Egyptian mythology, nemesis of the sun deity Ra, according to NASA. Now, again, just coincidence that the god of destruction would be, of chaos and darkness would be the god that they chose for this. Strange coincidence number 4, the Devil's Comet. Now, scientists call it P12 Pons Brooks. That's the technical name of a comet that comes around every 71 years, okay? Every 71 years this comes around. Now, it's been doing this for about 900 years. The Chinese saw it 900. This thing is huge. It's about 3 times the size of Mount Everest. It's 18 miles across. It's huge. And guess when it shows up? Tomorrow. I saw a report just yesterday in the news that if you're in the total eclipse area of the sun, when it darkens down, you will be able to see the Devil's Comet, that's its nickname, right next to the sun. Strange coincidences going on there. First time in 71 years it's been here, but you'll be able to see it in the daytime. And by the way, the last time we had 2 comets to cross, 2 solar eclipses in 1 year and a comet the same year. Now, in case you didn't get that, let me see again. The last time we had 2 solar eclipses in a year that crossed and a comet brought into the mix was the year 1811. You know what happened just a couple of months later? We had the New Madrid Fault earthquake. The Mississippi River ran backwards for a day. Reelfoot Lake in western Tennessee was formed. The Liberty Bell rang in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That's how strong that quake was. You saying, Pastor, we're going to have an earthquake? I don't know. Had one in New York just a couple of days ago. Just saying. Watch. Just keep your eyes open. We don't know what's going to happen. But it's fascinating. Okay. So 211 years ago, I think was, if that was anyway, 1811 was the year. I may have miscalculated. I pulled that out of the year. But anyway, the year was 1811. William Howard Taft was the president then. Strange coincidence number 5. Cicadas are reemerging this month. Now, I can't pin a day on that because they're going to come out in the billions in the month of April. Some, no doubt, have already begun to emerge. You know what the common name of a cicada is? A locust. Now, you say, well, they hatch often. Yes, they do, but this year is different. You know why? There's 2 hatches. There's a group that hatches every 17 years and a group that hatches every 11 years. And because those are prime numbers, it won't happen for another 211 years. 221 years. Let me make sure I got that right. The last time it happened was in 1803. Andrew Jackson was our president. So nobody in our lifetime has ever seen the emergence of 2 locusts in the same year. But they're coming out this year. Do you know where they're going to hatch? In the heartland of the United States, right where the X crosses. Just a coincidence. I don't know what to make of all this stuff. But again, 221 years ago it happened, and now it's happening again. And tomorrow, some of them, no doubt, will be breaking through. Let me give you a 6th coincidence. The planet alignments. I've read as many reports as I could find on it, and I don't know if it's 5 planets. Some said that all 9 planets in our solar system are in alignment. And what makes it unique is that if you're in the total eclipse area of the sun, then you'll be able to see them, that they're lined up perfectly. And right between the sun and, I think it's Jupiter, if memory serves correctly, the devil's comet comes blazing through right at that time. Now, I don't understand all this, folks, but I think God's trying to get our attention. There's a lot of stuff going on. And again, I can't tell you what, but I can tell you who. His name is Jesus. And we better be watching. We better be ready. Now, all right, so that's the unique timing of this event. Now, secondly, I want you to think about the unusual tenets of the sacrifice. It's a clear picture of Jesus. Every Old Testament sacrifice was a picture of Jesus. You know that. I've said that ad infinitum. I mean, just forever, or ad nauseum probably. Every Old Testament sacrifice was a forerunner, a picture of Jesus. Now, why was it red? Because in the Bible, red is the color of sin. Now, think about that. A lot of people say the color of sin in the Bible is black. I mean, after all, John 3 says, but men love darkness rather than the light because their deeds were evil. But that's not the color. Isaiah 1:18 says, come, let us reason together, saith the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be wool. The color of sin is red. And this is a red heifer. Now, we read Numbers 19, but I didn't even show you the very next verse I wanted to show you. But anyway, it's 2 Corinthians 5:21, and we may ask you to pull it up in just a moment. But anyway, so red is a picture of sin. And here is this sacrifice that is a red heifer. By the way, the only one, and I'll say this again in a moment, the only sacrifice that has a specified color. The reason it's unique is because it was to depict sin. Now, why is that important? Look at 2 Corinthians 5:21, if we can put that up there. And I may be pressing our text to the crew. Don't worry about it. Let me just tell you what it says. 2 Corinthians 5:21. He hath made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. Jesus was sinless, but he took our sin. He took our red sin in that sacrifice. And so the color is very unique. Now, let's go back to Numbers chapter 19. If you'll remember, a couple of things that it said was that you had to have hyssop that was thrown on there, you had to have scarlet material which was thrown on there, and you had to have cedar which was thrown on there, on the fire, burning that altar. Again, how does that point to Jesus? Well, do you remember? John 19 says when Jesus was on the cross, they took a piece of hyssop, put a sponge on it with sour wine, and offered him a drink of sour wine. He refused it. It was like a narcotic. He wasn't going to do it. But the hyssop was there. Did you know that Matthew 19 says that they had a scarlet robe on him? There's your scarlet cloth. Well, what about the cedar? I can't say this for sure, but I will tell you there are many who believe that the cross member of the cross that Jesus died on was made out of the cedars of Lebanon, that it was made of cedar. I can't give you a biblical reference on that. I'm still running that down. I just haven't been able to find what I wanted to find. But I do believe that all three of those things point to Jesus. Now, this was the only sacrifice that did not have to have a priest to burn that animal. Why? Because purification from sin is for everyone, not just for the priests. Everybody. They could have your eye could have offered that sacrifice, as long as we were clean, of course. Now, the strange thing about it, you had the priest there, he's sprinkling blood towards the tabernacle. You had this man burning it, and then you had another man who came up to collect the ashes. All right. Those three were all clean when they started the process, but they became unclean. Rabbis have puzzled over that. How in the world could clean priests become unclean by offering a sacrifice? We're just doing what the Lord said do. The answer is 2 Corinthians 5:21. He who knew no sin became sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. That animal had to be sacrificed outside the gate. Jesus died outside the gate on Calvary's cross. It just all ties together. So first of all, it's a clear picture of Jesus' sacrifice. Now, it was the only sacrifice that had to be a female. No other sacrifice in the Bible had to be a female. This one did. Now, you know, I realize a lot of us grew up in the city and we don't know a whole lot about animals. And I heard of a boy from Nashville who was out on the farm, and he asked the farmer, he said, why does that cow not have horns? And the farmer said, well, there are a lot of reasons that cows don't have horns. He said, first of all, it's a recessive trait. You have to have two of the recessive genes to get together for you to have that. So you can actually breed it out if you want to. He said, sometimes you have cows that don't have horns because we dehorn them. We actually cut them off and dehorn them that way. But the reason that cow doesn't have horns is because it's not a cow, it's a horse. Well, we're talking a cow here. And we're so get that in your mind. It doesn't have to be a hornless cow. I didn't mean to imply that. But anyway, we're talking a female. Now, a female, a heifer is a female. That's the point I wanted to make through that. It has to be a red heifer. She could not have had a baby. She becomes a cow at that point. But she had to be a heifer. And there are limits. It had to be 2 years, 2 months old, at least, but it could not exceed an upper limit. And so there's always that time crunch. They're under pressure to get this animal sacrificed in Israel. Now, so there are some of the things that make it unique, and the unique tenets of it is it was a picture of Jesus. Secondly, it's the only sacrifice that had to be a female. Thirdly, it's the only sacrifice of a particular color. It's the only sacrifice where the ashes were kept. They didn't keep the ashes from the burned animals. They threw them away. Not in this case. They kept the ashes. And it was the only sacrifice which ideally continues on. It went on forever. You say, how did it do that? Well, they would take this animal and burn it. And in order to receive those ashes, they took manure from that animal and mixed it with dirt and baked it and made a container called a kalal. And they would use that kalal to collect the ashes. And of course, every person that was being cleansed, they would take a pinch of those ashes, put it in water, stir it around. That was the water purification. Before a priest could go into the holy places, he had to have the water purification. Before you could enter into any part of the tabernacle, you had to have the water purification. So they used up the ashes. But what they would do is this. Now, the rabbis say that the most that could have been sacrificed was 9 of these animals. In all of Jewish history, only 9 cows were ever sacrificed this way. If this happens this month in Israel, it'll be number 10. So anyway, they would collect these ashes in the kalal. And then if they had to replace them, they would find another red heifer, offer her as a sacrifice, take that kalal and put it on the sacrifice and burn it as well. Manure burns. Ask the American Indians. They stayed warm in cold winter months by burning cow chip or buffalo chips, where the buffaloes would go to the bathroom, they'd pick it up and they could burn it. That was their heat source. That was their fuel source. And so this kalal would burn. And then they would collect it in a new kalal. And by doing that, they had part of the original ashes all the way from the very beginning. Theoretically, it was one sacrifice that went on forever. And they would have it that way because they would take those ashes and mix them with the new ashes. And when they ran low, they would take those ashes and mix them with the next ashes. And theoretically, they had some of the first ashes from that first red heifer all the time. Now, that's the only sacrifice. This sacrifice is the only one where they not only kept the ashes, but they also did it, and it had that ongoing significance. Listen, if you would, to Hebrews chapter 10. And let me just read, beginning in verse 10. By this, we will have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. Every priest stands daily ministering and offering time after time the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But Jesus, having offered one sacrifice for sins for all time, sat down at the right hand of God. For by one offering, he has perfected forever those who are sanctified by him. Jesus was one offering, and that's why they had this sense of continuing the one offering. Now, the next thing, it was done outside the camp. They couldn't do it on the inside. Now, they according to Numbers 19:3, they had to do this outside. They collected those ashes for purification purposes, and if a leper came in, for example, he couldn't go inside the tent of meeting. He had to stay outside. They would purify him, and then he could go in. He was clean. But the one who purified him had to stay outside. He became sin for him. And when you read the rest of Numbers chapter 19, he has a lot of dealing about death. If you come in contact with a dead body, if you're in a room where someone died, you had to be purified. They would use the ashes of the red heifer for purification for all of those who needed to be purified. Again, he was made sin for us who knew no sin, in order that we might become the righteousness of God in him. Now, one of the most fascinating stories out of Israel's history, they became a nation in 1948, but one of the most fascinating stories is the story of a little shepherd boy who was outside of Qumran tending his father's sheep. One of the sheep disappeared. He's hunting for him, trying to find this sheep. A lot of caves there. Phyllis and I have been there. Lots of caves. You can see them all over the walls there. He just took a stone and threw it in a cave, just as a boy would do, and he heard a pot break. Well, he climbed up in there and he found a bunch of pots. And he thought, well, maybe this will help my dad not be so mad at me for losing the sheep. This is probably containing gold and silver. It's probably treasure. And so dad won't be mad at me. So he opened up one, and you know what he found? All he found was some old writing. He took it home, and Dad looked at it and said, that's just a bunch of old writings. Dad gave it to somebody else, who gave it to somebody else, who gave it to somebody else. And eventually it came to someone who knew what it was and said, this is an ancient Hebrew text. Those pots became the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay? There was no gold in them, but it's a treasure trove of proof about the authority of Scripture and how accurate the Scriptures are, because those texts from over 2,000 years ago prove that our Scripture is correct. Okay? Now, about 100 yards away from that cave, they began exploring through these caves. They found another cave that had a pot in it. They opened it up, and they found what they call the copper scroll. And it was unique in some ways. It actually had some instructions, and the way they believe it got there was because in 70 A.D., Titus and the famed 10th Roman Legion besieged Jerusalem. The Jews knew they were about to be overrun, and so they gathered up the things they could gather in a hurry, and they fled to the hills, and they were hiding in the hills. And they hid things along the way. 1,000 of them went to Masada and died there. Tremendous story about Masada. Fascinating, but we don't have time to go there, so don't even ask. But theoretically, we believe they hid some of the stuff in these caves, and it was called the Qumran Scrolls, or the Dead Sea Scrolls, and particularly the Copper Scrolls. That Copper Scroll said this, and I quote, "On the way from Jericho to Sequesh by the river Hakapi, in the tomb of Zadok the priest, which is a cave that has two openings, an opening on the side by the north, a view toward the east, then 2.5 cubits under the plaster, and there will be found the Kalil, and under it a book." Now, they went on to say, well, the book's going to repeat what you've just read, but we do that for authenticity, so you'll know you found the right place. Well, there were obviously Jewish scholars and archaeologists who went there, and they're trying to find, this cave. There was one American involved from Texas. Again, strange connection to Texas and all this, but one from Texas. His name was Vendell Jones. He loved Israel. As a matter of fact, in the 6-Day War, he became a hero for Israel. He was colorblind, and he was able to identify Arab targets. He identified over 100 Arab targets, and so Israel loved him, and they allowed him to be involved in this. He knew ancient Hebrew. He could read these things, and And he said, I have excavated in 100 caves there. I know the cave he's talking about. There's only one cave in that area that has two entrances that face the east and the north. And he said, I know which one. They went there. He actually found a plaster covering. They broke through it, and they did find some significant things. They did not find the kalal as best we know. I would add this. We don't know. We don't know all that they found. Israel doesn't, they keep their cards close to the vest, and you can understand why. But anyway, for at least 18 years, they had feather dusters and teaspoons, and they're trying to excavate because of the value that they're trying to find. I mean, they're looking for the kalal. One reporter was there and was talking to Vendell Jones and said, this would make a great movie. Vendell had said, I'm convinced we're not only going to find the kalal, we're going to find the Ark of the Covenant. And this writer said, that'd make a great movie. And they did. They made it into a movie. The Raiders of the Lost Ark. Vindy Jones sounds a lot like Indy Jones, doesn't it? Now, by the way, I want you to also know this. Steven Spielberg, Philip Kaufman, I couldn't remember Kaufman. Steven Spielberg, Kaufman, George Lucas were all involved in Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. They all denied that it had anything to do with them. You understand why. You're talking money. You use him, you got to pay him. So, and by the way, he never asked for any money. He didn't. But anyway, what did they find? We don't know. But it's a fascinating story. The chief archaeologist of Israel's Department of Antiquities was so convinced that they were right, he said this, I am certain this is the place described in the Copper Scrolls. Have they found it? We don't know. But it's just a little bit of interesting history behind it all. Now, so we've thought about the unique timing of the sacrifice. How am I doing on time? Oh, we're okay. We've thought about the unique timing of the sacrifice. We've thought about the unusual tenets of the sacrifice. But thirdly, what is the ultimate takeaway of this sacrifice? What is this all about? If it does indeed happen, if they really do offer these animals, why is that important? Well, for years now, the Temple Institute in Israel has been practicing the science, if you will, of animal sacrifice. Now, they can practice it, but they cannot perform it. Do you know why? Because those priests have to go through the water purification, and they can't do that until they have the ashes of a red heifer. And so it becomes very significant. They have to have those ashes in order to purify the priests. The priests can't offer sacrifices yet. Now, why is that important to you and I, and as Bible-believing Christians? Look at Daniel 9:27. We'll put it on the board for you. But Daniel 9:27 speaks of the Antichrist, and it's talking about the week of tribulation, the 7 years of tribulation, the second half being what we would call the Great Tribulation. And it says the Antichrist will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. And we're talking 7 years. I don't have time to go back and prove that. Trust me on that, okay? For 1 week. But in the middle of that week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offerings. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. Now, basically, there's an event that's going to happen called the abomination of desolation. Jesus talked about it in Matthew chapter 24, okay? But in order for the tribulation to take place, there have to be animal sacrifices going on, and we all think the temple. So this is significant. Folks, if we're right about this, it means that you're a very blessed group of people. You may be watching this week the beginning of the end. Think of that. Let that soak in for a minute. Will they offer this animal? I don't know. I can't promise anything. But I'm telling you, all these things are in the hopper. All of it fitting together. And God speaks through the skies. Wake up. Wake up. These days are too important to let this stuff just slide by. So there's going to be an animal sacrifice, and the Antichrist is going to put an end to those sacrifices in an event called the Abomination of Desolation. It also happened in 163 BC, 163, I think, when Antiochus Epiphanes, offered a pig on the altar of the Jews in the temple. He desecrated the place. That was called an abomination of desolations as well. Now, this is interesting to me. In 1974, Phyllis and I sat regularly in a Bible study with a man named M.S. Offit. You've heard me refer to Dr. Offit, had a profound impact upon my life. He said, and I remember this as clear as a bell, he said, I don't believe the temple will be built on the Temple Mount. He said, I believe it'll be built in Shiloh. I said, why, Dr. Offit? He said, because Shiloh was the permanent home of the tabernacle. I went back this week and read every verse on Shiloh that I could find. Shiloh is the place where the tabernacle was. And throughout the days of Israel, before they had the temple, they'd go to Shiloh. That's where they had their sacrifices. That's where they worshiped. That was the tabernacle, by the way, is an exact copy of the temple, or I should say the temple is an exact copy of the tabernacle. They're shaped the same, the sizes are the same, the dimensions are the same. I mean, it's fascinating. Okay. So Dr. Offit said, I think they'll build the temple in Shiloh. Now, I've never heard anybody else say that. But do you know where they're holding these red heifers? Shiloh. Amazing coincidences. What does it mean? I don't know. But it just sounds so profound to me that it's got to be more than just a coincidence. Now, that they're keeping that. Now, and by the way, when Jesus talked about the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24:8, he said when they have the abomination of desolation in the holy place, he didn't say in the temple. Maybe we don't have, is it possible that we don't have to have the temple? That maybe there could be another holy place built in Shiloh, something like the tabernacle? That's where they began this process. I don't know. Don't ask me. I don't know. But it could be. It could be. It's just strange that they're holding these heifers in Shiloh. And I'm not sure. Did I show you the picture of the altar that was built? Again, I'm going to drive the text crazy today, but if you will, go back to the picture of the heifers, the one right after the heifers, right at the beginning picture. This was a shot. This is the altar that they had built to offer these sacrifices on. Now, I first saw this on CBS News, CBS Saturday Morning News. That's where I first saw it. This is from another one, but that's the altar that they had built to sacrifice these red heifers on. Now, they didn't say for sure. I think that's on the Mount of Olives. There are reasons for that. And again, we don't have time to go into it. But anyway, all these things, folks, the takeaway from this is we may be watching the beginning of the Lord coming back to earth. For 7,000 years, we've been waiting and thinking about all this. In Matthew 24, verse 8, Jesus compared the second coming to a labor and delivery. And, he said they're like this is the beginning of birth pangs. Okay, now every mother here can tell you that when you go into labor, you begin to feel contractions, and they increase in frequency and in strength. Isn't that true, Dr. Smith? They increase. He's my resident OB. I ask him a lot. All right. Those birth pains, even though he's a man, he knows, ladies. Okay, all right. They increase in intensity and in frequency. Think of that same pregnant woman. Same woman. Jesus said, when she's going into labor, that's the beginning of the end of his coming again. Same woman. Back up a few months. One day she's walking along and she says, you know what, I'm nauseated as I can be. And then she realizes, boy, my appetite has changed. I want pickles and ice cream. What is the matter with me? And my stomach's beginning to grow. What is going on? So she goes to see her doctor. And he says, you're 3 months pregnant. Now, she didn't know it. But then she thinks, that's right. Some things happened 3 months ago, and I guess I'm pregnant. Is something going to happen tomorrow? I don't know. It may be like the beginning of that pregnancy. We may not see anything. I don't care. It's not that I don't care, but I'm saying it doesn't really matter because that doesn't mean anything. It may be the beginning of that pregnancy cycle. And we may be watching it, ladies and gentlemen. Wow. Now, think with me just for a moment. Because some of you, that's exciting. For some of you, it may be scary. Because you've been half-hearted about this business of the Lord for decades. Oh, you meant to get more serious about it, but you never did. And now things like this are going on. Now again, I don't know what all is going to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just a newsboy sharing some of the facts that I find. But if it's scary to you, keep a couple of things in mind. Number one, it doesn't have to be. Turn to the Lord. Walk with Him. Live for Him. Look to Him. Let Him become preeminent in your life. You don't have to fear these things. As a matter of fact, I am convinced God does not want us to be afraid. Let me give you a couple of verses to keep in mind. John 16:33. Jesus said, in the world, you will have tribulation. But take courage. I have overcome the world. Ladies and gentlemen, when you're following Him, you're with the winner. You need to understand that. You need to base your life around Him. Let me give you another great verse, Isaiah 41:10. I committed this to memory many, many years ago. It's a great verse that says, fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. Surely I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to turn to Him. You need to look to Him because He's the one who's going to get you through this mess. It's exciting to me to think we've known it could happen anytime. Is this it? I don't know, but you don't know that it's not. You see, it's just an important time in history. And it may be like that pregnancy. We may not see anything, but a few months down the road, we may see some things. Keep your eyes open. That's what I'm saying. I want us to bow our heads for a moment, heads bowed and eyes closed, because some of you have been playing games for a long time. You meant to get things right. It's not that you just absolutely ruled out following the Lord, but you never really did it. Maybe today would be your day. Maybe today would be the day that you would say, I want Jesus. I want to follow Him. I want to know Him. I want to walk with Him. The good news is, right now, you can put all of your hope in Jesus. You can trust Him right now. If you feel that desire in your heart to come to Him, let me urge you to do that. Give your heart to Him. Be saved today. Don't leave this place and not know Him. I wouldn't trade my salvation for 5 minutes for $10 million, and I mean that. I wouldn't give up my salvation for 5 minutes for $10 million. Do you know Him? Have you been saved by His grace? I hope you have. If you haven't, I hope that today you'll come to know Him. He loves you. He wants you. He died for you. He became sin so that you could go free. He stayed outside the camp so that you could go into the camp. He who knew no sin became sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in Him. He'll take your sin and give you His righteousness. But that choice is yours and yours alone. Mom can't make it for you. Dad can't make it for you. Your wife, your husband, no one can make that decision for you. You have to decide that. Father, I pray you'd have your way in every heart today. Lord, should there be some here who need to be saved, I pray that today would be the day. God, help them to know that you are calling them. I pray, Father, they'd say yes with an everlasting yes and come to you. In Jesus' name, amen.